You on?
Wholeness family, divinity to everyone. What we're going to do today, we're going to continue with this idea of the profundity of this inversion because we're going to have to understand the magnitude and effect and impact the concept actually is itself and the revealing of it by Abba Ben and what we've been working with here online prepares us, for understanding things that previously we dared not go into. Reason being, of course, we were taught that everything began with the Old Testament, and anything in the New that didn't coincide with the Old, you have to what? Throw the new out and hold fast to the old. Now I know that's our teaching, you know, but that we got to reconsider. That was to maintain our dualistic perception and view of things
Yeah.
and to maintain us in the simulated false mind matrix. And in that cycle, there was no way to halt the downward spiral. There was no way to bring the blessings. You were always going to be, quote unquote, cursed. Now we're
Absolutely.
going to get into that. Now that's the word curse. I want us to remember that. As Eitai always said, write that word down because sometimes we hear these terms and we give our Christian, conceptualization and definition to these terms. So we continue with the inversion, but we're going to title this portion here, The Biblical Impact on the Traditional Template or Pattern Opposes the Eternal. I'll read it again. The biblical impact on the traditional template or pattern opposes the eternal pattern or template. Now, just what I just stated in respect to the old and the new. Now let's jump forward and think about many of the quotes that is attributed, as we are taught in the kingdom, to Yeshua. We understand Yeshua. Some of us prefer to say Yeshua, but we understand the Jesus Christ. Jesus the man, Christ the anointed. So we would see Yeshua as being a Hebraic name, but being the anointed, being the Messiah, being the deliverer, the Savior. This is how we would interpret it in contemporary time. So, the biblical impact on the traditional template or pattern opposes the eternal pattern. Now, when we think about the eternal, we think about everlasting, no end. But Abba Ben for his transition, he left us with physical immortality. And as he's transitioned, and others have transitioned along this particular cycle of time, what has actually happened is that majority of us that lost the concept or even have any faith or belief in immortality, at all. So let us consider this today. We're going to take our time and I'm going to set this up for Eitai to, alley-oop and to bring it home, from on high. They just say up high and down low.
Oh boy.
So, as we continue, the controversy and conflict continue to pervade the earth and all of humanity because of the tradition and the eternality. The controversy and conflict continues to pervade the earth and all of humanity because of the traditions and the eternality or the everlasting. Okay? The traditional views were established upon the memorials, and the eternality or everlasting is upon the new, contemporary, or modern ways of perceiving life within the world.
Okay.
Thus, this has been and still is one of the great biblical plagues. We say a biblical plague of the epic struggle of the ancient and contemporary biblical influence. So we talk about plagues, but most of us think about, the physical element when you talk about a plague. But do you know deception, cognitive dissonance, duality,
Yes.
death, all those are plagues. Those are plagues. Confusion, disharmony, all of those are plagues. And we got to understand it from that energetic point of reference.
Right.
So when we consider these as plagues, we ain't looking for something to happen. It done already happened. We're already under the plague of epic struggle, the ancient and contemporary biblical influence brought with it the plagues of deception, plagues of disharmony, disunity, and so forth and so on. When we consider the template or the pattern, let's look at it. And we're going to read where it says, the template is a gauge, a pattern, or a model. Okay, so if it's a model, it's something that we have to consider in terms of a process by which we go about bringing something into existence.
Yes.
By bringing something into existence. So we've been cautioned, by Eitai numerous times about monitoring, our emotions, monitoring, how we think about things, and so forth and so on. So when we understand that these patterns are to be used for bringing things into existence, we go back to, if we have the right pattern, we will produce the right thing. And if we got the wrong pattern, under the influence of deception, you would be creating or causing or bringing forward that which is adversarial, but you would never see that you are responsible for it. You will always talk about an adversary outside of you.
That's correct.
Very, very important. Continuing on. This will make all the sense in the world when we understand what we've been taught and what we are teaching now about our emanation. That all of this that we are dealing with has to do, directly with us as a species, as the sons and daughters, as the divinity, everything has to do with us. We use the concept of the ancestors. We talk about the ancestors, but the ancestors is what? As we always say, it is our higher divinity, that is dormant, or that's in the subconscious, element of our energies source,
Correct.
Our being. So this is exactly the template that the scientific social engineers use in formulating their social construction of the simulated mind matrix of reality. Everyone on the planet is presently comes under the influence of some form of this hierarchical idea of society governance of themselves. when we understand that a template is a pattern or model used as a gauge that we must see and use, that the pattern slash model is the gauge, is the correct gauge, and not to be established on anything or upon anything that is traditional or rigid. Because if it's rigid, it has lost its fluidity.
That's correct.
And it's losing its fluidity, difficult to change.
That's right.
So these traditions brings us under, you understand, if we're not careful, yes, to the right, eternal, what we call our Benamis are always talking about the eternal idea. If it's not the eternal model or pattern, you're going to have to defend it. And when you defend it, you start to believe in it, you implement it into your cycle or what you would call living, within the environment, you actually become very rigid and holding on to that as your belief. Hard to change that individual. Hard to change. The cycle and season of change must be fluidity and not rigid. This begins at spring or the new year or the new season. And this makes Passover make sense, you see, because if you what? Under the influence of the traditions, you're going to be rigid in maintaining that from year to year.
That's correct.
But this is why Passover was introduced, because Passover is actually the what? The season of change.
That's correct.
So in the season of change, you, instead of being rigid, you have to be in the spirit of fluidity. Easy to what? Hear, quick to hear, and easy to make the transition out of the old thought process, old way of viewing things, old way of doing things.
Old paradigm.
Old paradigm. Yeah, so we cite a couple of references here from Exodus, the 12th chapter, verses 7, verse 25 through 27. Exodus 12 and 7, verse 25 through verse 27. And verse 7 reads, "And there shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts, and on the upper doorpost of the house wherein they shall eat it." Okay? 25.
Nasik, come on. Come on now.
"And it shall come to pass." Now, well, first of all, let's go back. Again, we hear the allegorical language. We hear the symbols used. But we got to understand that allegorical symbolic language is all talking about you and I as individuals. Let's throw out the physical house. You the house. Okay?
Nasik.
Uh-huh.
Can I pause here real quick?
Please.
All right.
"And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the two side posts and on the upper doorposts of the house, wherein they shall eat it." Well, we know that if you're eating something, if you understand that you eating and you represent the house, you got to know that it has to be talking about you. And that's the main thing we got to drive home. And Eitai going to expand it on further. But we want to drive home that this is allegorical, symbolic language. And because of seeing it in the traditional way and never ever able to move beyond the tradition to the eternal, this becomes problematic. So, I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to let Eitai pick her ass when he come on. 25. And it shall come to pass, when you are come to the land which the Lord will give you, according as he has promised, that you shall keep this service. Now, let's stop for a moment. This word keep, got to understand this, because sometimes we read these things, but not, staying with it in our energetic and our higher consciousness. We sort of just accept what we traditionally had been taught and what we believe. But this word keep, the Strong's number is 8104. Okay, 8104 is Shema. Hebrew meaning to hedge around something. To hedge around, to hedge about. To keep, to guard. Now, we got to understand that when we come into the land, we had to make sure that we kept this particular vision and understanding. And it says here, keep this service. So what is the service? We say, well, okay, the service is 56, and it means avodah. In other words, you got to do something. You got to work. Then it says from 5647, it's abad or avad, to work, to toil, to be worked, to till, to cause to work, to make weary, fatigue. Now, so we came into the land and we kept the Passover as a symbolic, you understand, allegorical, in terms of we kept our clothes on, you understand? Right. We initially started and we was eating in haze. And after we ate, you understand, the next morning we would go out and burn the food and all these things. Allegorical, traditional pattern that was given to Moses, in the construction of the physical tabernacle. The physical tabernacle. Now, so if you maintain the traditional view, then you're going to what? Reject the what? New Testament or the New Covenant. But if the Old Covenant had not had fault, there would be no need for a new.
There you go.
There would be no need for a new. So the physical temple was never what it was talking about. It was always about you and I. The work that we had to do. The internal work that we got to do. This is the keeping of the service, the toil and the labor, as we transition out of the old, working on the old, the self, the body, this physical structure that we have become more geared to than our energetic element. That's a lot of work to do. That's hard to get out of that, but that's what this is all about. Continuing on. We use the word "26," and it says, not the word, we use the next verse, 26, and it shall come to pass, when your children say unto you, what mean you this? It says, then you shall say, it is a sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the house of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses, and and the people bow the head and worship. So here we find that the passing over the house. Now let's go back to something about the lamb. But we literally killed the lamb. But if you were supposed to what be the lamb, Abba Ben-Ami, explains this much later in Liberia when the lamb hung himself.
Right.
But we actually killed the lamb, but we had to kill the lamb. Other than that, we would have to kill ourselves. You understand? If we understood that we were the sacrifice. But see, all this was symbolic. All this was allegorical.
That's correct.
And as we now come to understand it, we were the lamb that was passed over. We were the house that was passed over. It wasn't like, concept of America, you Hebrew Israelites, and Passover come, and the death angel pass over you, and as Charlton Heston played, blood was running all through the streets and then, in Egypt, So all of this now, we didn't come through all of this, and we got a fixed, kind of rigid, understanding within us about much of the very, significant things that we are talking about today. So let's bear with us. Let's move on. So as we look at these traditions, we look at the definition of the word tradition. Tradition, an inherited, established, or customary pattern of thought. Well, that's what we've inherited. A customary pattern of thinking that has become traditionally applied every year come Passover.
Right.
Come the memorial blowing of the trumpet. We're getting ready to come into that right now. All of these seasons of holy days. Well, and as you read it, it tells you they should be kept throughout, your whole life. Well, what life is that you're supposed to continue to keep doing that? As long as you're in the simulated matrix,
that's right.
False matrix idea, you must keep doing that.
Right, you better.
You must keep doing that. So, continuing on, it says, an inherited, established customary pattern of thought, action, or behavior. And in parentheses said, such as a religious practice or social custom. If that ain't what humanity does, we ain't on this line.
Right.
Going on, definition 2, a belief or story or a body of beliefs or stories relating to the past that are commonly accepted as historical, though not verifiable. Did y'all hear that definition? Let me read that again. A belief or story or a body of beliefs or stories relating to the past that are commonly accepted as historical, though not verifiable. But when you become, influenced by the dualistic way of viewing things, you must become rigid. There's no other way. You have to take a position. And if you don't take a position, they define you as being weak. You have to take a position, a strong position. If your faith is strong in the Lord, you must take a position on the Lord's side.
That's right.
Continuing on, definition number 2, that was definition 1B. Number 2, the handing down of information, beliefs, and customs by word of mouth or by example from one generation to another without written instructions. 3, cultural continuity in social attitudes, customs, and institutions. Now, this cultural continuity, where did this cultural continuity, I take a position on this whole idea of culture. As we continue on, we'll see the position and we'll see how it has played us, out of pocket and caused us to what? Use the concept of culture to continue to build, but what we are building on the old pattern, the old traditions.
Right, right.
And these old traditions, you understand, prevents us from moving out of the physical way of perceiving, conceiving, and manifesting into the energetic realm where we can manifest sudden power. 4, a characteristic manner, method, or style. So, our character has been built upon the manner and methods of the cultural, ideas that has been handed down, some written instruction biblically with misinterpretations of the allegory made to be historical when they were never.
Right.
And have not been able to verify, but our religious practice and belief causes us to accept what is false and invalid to be true and valid.
Simple as that.
Continuing on. Now we move to a biblical reference here that's going to really, really help us to understand why Yeshua or Jesus Christ was always at odds with even many of his disciples,
right,
and many of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, or those in the hierarchical positions of leadership among the community. Okay? It reads, Matthew, the 15th chapter, verses 1 through 6. Matthew 15, 1 through 6. So then came to Jesus scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, why do the disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? Now, here we go. You can see that they were under the influence of the old traditional ways of doing things. The old pattern that was allegorical and never organic. For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. Well, we interpreted that in contemporary time, in other words, unorthodox methods were being used. But he answered and said unto them, why do you also transgress the commandments of God by your tradition? So now we find the contemporary and the new in an epic struggle here. And this particular struggle has been among all Israelites. All Israelites. They talk about the Greek Testament. You cannot believe. You got to hold fast to the Hebrew because Moses wrote it and and here we go. We can never agree. And we can't never. Now we go and say, can two walk together except they be agreed?
Right.
There can't be no agreement when you what? Under the influence of the simulated, false matrix of reality. You just cannot agree on the duality. You cannot agree. So we're looking at the traditional biblical impact on the template or the pattern that opposes the eternal pattern. This is what we're looking at. Continuing on. Verse 4. For God commanded, saying, honor thy father and thy mother. And he that curses, now here I told you to write the word curse down. The number is 2556. And this word 2556 that they put curses, it means worthless, valueless, and useless. Now, I know when something is cursed, you never actually seen it's being something that's worthless and useless and valueless. Because if you say that you are cursed, what you're trying to do is find a way to what? Remove the curse. Because you think the curse is something spiritual.
Correct.
You've been made to believe that the curse is something spiritual.
Absolutely correct.
But now the word here for curses is worthless, valueless, and useless. Now I'm going to go back and read this again. It said, "For God commanded, saying, honor thy father and mother. And he that curses, father or mother, let him die to death." Now, let's consider this now. Because we got to put this in, we got to decode this, because here we talk about worthless, valueless, you cannot understand this reference here if you're using dualistic language, if you're using what? Duality, because you're going to see father and mother as being something separate.
Correct. Correct.
That's a major mistake. So what we're going to do, we're going to read it within this context again. Let's read it again. "For God commanded, saying, honor thy father and mother. And he that curses father or mother, let him die to death. But ye say, whosoever shall say to his father or his mother, it is a gift." Now, the word gift here, write down the word gift, and the New Testament number for gift is 1435. And you already know this. The gift is nothing but a sacrifice or an offering that you've been given. That's all the gift is, the sacrifice or the offering that you've been making. But the sacrifice and offering that we've been making has been worthless, valueless, and useless.
Correct.
That's been the problem.
That's right.
It cannot produce anything. It says, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me. Verse 6, "And honor not his father or his mother, he shall be free. Thus have you made the commandments of God
of none
effect by your tradition." Now, I don't care how many times you read that, you ain't going to understand that based upon just reading it and trying to understand it from, quote unquote, a spiritual way of looking at this. So what we're going to do, we're going to kind of decode it and put it in a language that you can understand and you can be able to follow. Now, this is what we said. When there is no unity of conscious thought pattern or model as our template to gauge our relationship with the overarching, meaning dominating or embracing all else, we have not honored wholeness and oneness as our father or mother being a people. Thus, we have made the commandment of God of none effect by our tradition. Whatsoever, by what way can anything be done without the unity of consciousness by which we might profit ourselves? What can we do without the unity of consciousness that we're going to what? Profit ourselves as a whole.
Not a thing.
We got to do it with unity.
That's correct.
If everybody is going to what? Be affected. That's why it's important for every individual to work on himself, because he's an integral part of the whole. But every individual has to work on himself. He must do the work on himself that he become whole. So his function with being an integral part, an essential part of the work that is required of the whole creation or the whole of humanity. Continuing on. Thus, any other gift, sacrifice, or offering has not and will not change the conditions of humanity from the curse of being worthless, valueless, and useless. We are all good for nothing, but to all die to death. And that's exactly what's been happening.
That's correct.
Since we have been worthless and useless and valueless, as the scripture gives another scriptural reference that say, if the salt has lost his ability to savor, what should it be done but to be trampled on the feet of men? So we see that this scripture begins to make more sense. The decoding of the scriptural reference above in Matthew helps to provide us with another level of understanding of Jesus the Christ, for some being preferable to say yea sure, thus giving the quote in Matthew some continuity to the ones below. Now, we just dealt with Matthew, so let's see if the quotes below and the scriptural references below have a little bit more continuity now as to what we just got through explaining. Matthews 12, 47 through 50 is the next quote. Matthews 12, 47 through 50. And then John, the 10th chapter, verse 30. John 10, 30. And then John 17, 11, 20, and 21. Matthew 12, 47, 50, John 10, 30, John 17, 11, 20 through 21. 12, 47 through 50 reads, Then one said unto him, Behold, thy mother and thy brother stand without, designed to speak with you. But he answered and said unto them, answered and said unto him that told him, Who is my mother, and who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hand toward his disciples, and said, Behold my mother and my brethren. He always kept making everything a unified whole.
That's correct.
He never separated himself from anything in creation. He saw himself as being everything, being unified, being entangled, being one.
We all have that ability, Nasik.
We must, Eitai, we must have that ability. Verse 50. For whatsoever shall do, whosoever shall do the will of my Father, which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother. So he see how this unity of thought, unity of consciousness is so vital. We must understand this point. Then he continues on to unify at the highest level. John 10:30. I and my Father are one. And he continues on in John 17, 11, 20 through 21. He said, And now I am no more in the world, but these are in the world, and I have come to thee. Holy Father, keep through thine own name those whom thou hast given me, that they may be one as we are. He bringing everything into wholeness, oneness, unity. Now these scriptures make sense now.
Absolutely.
But if we don't decode them and see what's being said, then we can see and understand what would be the benefit of anything that's valueless, hopeless, valueless, valueless, useless, and worthless. What would be the benefit if anything is worthless to be? Now let's go back and ask ourselves, we've been what? Offering up these worthless, valueless things year after year. Year after year. Absolutely. What benefit have we profited? What benefit? We got to stop and come out of our religious practices. We got to stop. We got to halt. Continuing on. When we carefully peruse the definition of culture and tradition above, we are able to see exactly how these concepts, ideas, is developed. The concept of culture, I feel very strong that is not an African ancestral concept or idea. It is of European origin and have been imposed upon humanity. Now, this is very important now because our religious experiences, as we read, I'm going to go all the way back.
Right.
Tradition. I'm going to read it again. I'm going to read inherited, established, or customary pattern of thought. Where did that come from? All of this is part of the false, simulated matrix, of reality. This is where it comes from. Now we understand that the ancestors, you understand? We understand that.
Correct.
But I'm saying that our customary belief did not come from the ancestors because we had lost contact with them, our higher nature, our divinity. We were following the practices of this aberrant man. Are you following me now?
That's correct.
Okay, continuing on. Action or behavior, such as religious practices or social custom. This is what we've been following. B, a belief or story or a body of beliefs or stories relating to the past that are commonly accepted as historical, though not verifiable. Culture continuity in social attitudes, customs, and institutions. Scientific social engineering creates inverted energy.
That's right.
And when this energy was inverted, it changed our whole cultural identity. It changed our whole, makeup. We come under the influence of institutions, that was put in place to ensure that we work for, labor for, toil for, keep this condition and never ever to ascend out of it. Okay, someone had a point?
No, Nasik, it changed our whole life experience.
Eitai, whole life experience.
That's how you sum it up. The whole life experience was changed and inverted.
Absolutely, absolutely. Continuing on. So the concept of culture was imposed upon humanity through war, military conquest, religion, and finally education. Eitai always kept telling us about this, what we call it, Eitai, this education, compulsory education.
Yeah.
Right. Very, 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 very important. Continuing on. Whenever we apply the definition of culture to our social environment, we can openly see a close connection to acculturation. And acculturation, cultural modification of an individual, group, or people by adapting to or borrowing traits from another culture. Also, a merging of cultures as a result of prolonged contact. Prolonged contact under a false simulated mind matrix. 400 years is a long time to be under some falsehood and think that, you know, in a few years you're going to transcend out of that.
That's right.
The process by which a human being acquires the culture of a particular society from infancy. This is where it all started with us. And we was born into this physical template. Continuing on. Discourse to the plenary assembly of the Pontifical Council for Culture. 8/3/1994. Pope John Paul II. This is his quote. He says, "You know that from the beginning of my pontificate, I have insisted on the crucial significance of the links between the church and culture. In my letter on the occasion of the foundation of the Pontifical Council for Culture, I recall, quote, a faith that does not become culture is not fully accepted, not entirely thought out, and not faithfully lived." So you cannot faithfully accept and what? Live except your idea of faith become culture. So culture is used to determine your faith.
That's correct.
So they brought us on the culture that made us believe in the faith of Christianity. And the tenets of Christianity is what? Heavily
That's right.
colored, you know, by Hebrewism.
That's correct.
Or Hebrewism is heavily covered by, you know, Christianity.
That's correct.
And I know this is kind of difficult for us to really, you know, have to accept, because then we see, you know, all what we've been doing, you know, we can see why we have not produced or manifest any kind of power or changed anything.
That's correct.
Continuing on. The Pope says the situation already points the way ahead for your task of evangelizing culture and enculturating faith. So, evangelizing culture and enculturating faith. Now, you know, I remember when I was growing up, you know, when you get to be 14, 15 years old, your parents start to ask you, are you ready to join the church?
Right.
So, join the church for me was what you call the morning bench. I don't know. Let me stop here at this point and ask anybody, do anybody know what the morning bench is?
Oh, yeah.
So you have to join the church. You have to get on the morning bench. And that is to say, you sit on this front row where all of those on a pew or a bench where everybody is prepared to join the church. And the preacher, he's teaching and he's making you feel real bad about your, you understand, inability to be under the dictates of the Creator and That's all the negative things that you done as a child, and now you ready to what? Break down into tears and crying and what? Confess. You understand that you ready to join the church. So, you know, I mean, I remember this. I remember this. Culture continuity, so to speak. He goes on to say Christianity is a creator of culture in its very foundation. So Christianity was not just a religion, it was a culture.
Yes.
It's a culture. And now we're going to define culture now. Now listen to this so you can understand that you was really being taught something that you had no idea. We had no idea what we was being brought under the influence of. Right. Culture. Now, it says development of the mind by education or training. So now this simulated false mind matrix, it ain't just happen, you understand, in the compulsory education, but when you went off to what? The church to be saved, you was being what? You was having your mind created and made to perceive that you actually had a mind, and this mind that you had was going to help you to make contact with God. I mean,
absolutely, Nasik.
Continuing on. Number 2, talking about culture. Sum total of ways of living built up by a group of human beings and transmitted from one generation to another. We just continue to perpetuate the tradition. Number 3, civilization. Civilization and culture both refer to the overall way of life of a people, and a civilization is a culture writ large. Both involve the values. Now, wait a minute now. They involve the values, the norms, institutions, and modes of thinking to which successive generations in a given society have attached primary importance. Now, remember now, it says that civilization and culture both involve the values and the norms and the institutions. So civilization and culture develops, you understand, what we call the values and the things that is normal in the institution to always keep you in opposition to the unity of self and one another, to keep you what? Tied down into the false, simulated mind matrix of reality. Keep you in duality. Keep you opposing yourself. Keep you opposing one. Well, my God is better than your God. My religion is more what? Stronger. You always trying to bring your friend to become a part of what you are. And you just pass this on from generation to generation. Now, we move into the element of the civilization and how it perpetuates things. That's why we mentioned earlier about rigidity, about in the civilization that caused you to keep Passover. As with any living organism, the birth of a civilization is initially characterized by a developmental period during which novel cultural ideas are introduced in the mainstream public. As a society matures, effective life-enhancing beliefs become canonized and perceived as cultural law. I read again. As a society matures, effective life-enhancing beliefs. Now, these life-enhancing beliefs are, quote unquote, the values and norms of institutions and modes of thinking. This way of thinking becomes an enhancing belief, and that enhancing belief becomes canonized and is perceived as cultural law. I got to do this because my culture says this. I must keep the law. I must. All of this is keeping you locked in. And these concretized beliefs lead to rigidity in a society's behavior type. Now, concretized mean concrete beliefs, fixed beliefs.
Written in stone.
And these fixed beliefs, they causes us to become real rigid in how we see everything. And our behavior patterns are right in harmony with the traditional way of viewing things. We cannot shift out of it. You dare not shift out of it. Over time, a society's fixed beliefs inevitably inevitably becomes irresolvable. Wait a minute. Let me get that correct. Eitai, put us on hold. Let me pull it because that's not reading.
All right, now go right ahead.
Okay. It says, continuing on. And where I'm reading from is a book called Spontaneous Evolution, written by Bruce Lipton. And I'm reading on page 206. And it reads, over time, a society's fixed beliefs inevitably precipitates irresolvable environmental challenges. At this stage of its life cycle, the cultural mainstream inherent rigidity expresses itself as an active resistance to change. An active resistance to change, even when confronted with life-threatening crisis. Inflexibility in a time of upheaval precipitates a rapid decline of the aging society. Now, that is simply to say, family, that if you don't change, that rigidity and repeating the same thing over and over year after year, that society has to decline. It has to disintegrate.
Absolutely.
Now, we can believe what we want. This myth that we want to hold on about some kingdom somewhere, that is not, believe me, the rigidity, the inability to change, to take on the eternal, want to hold on to the transient, not knowing it's the transit because one accept what is true and valid to be false and invalid. Correct. Deception, cognitive dissonance. This becomes very critical. Very, very critical. Continuing on. When we come to acknowledge the truth about cultural tradition, when they are applied within our social society, it is an absolute fact that is an imposition upon humanity by Europeans, mainly through war, military conquest. Now, when you read the stories, the allegorical language, and I had mentioned to Tamid, and I had given him a documentary that was done by Joseph Attewell And I meant for the family out there to see it, but we didn't get a chance to do that. It's called Caesar's Messiah. And in Caesar's Messiah, he lay out and show how all of the things that supposed to occurred by, the Jesus figure,
yes,
which he clearly debunks that there was no person by the name of Jesus,
correct,
never existed. He clearly debunks that they had backdated the writings and put in, quote unquote, Rome's military conquest as what was attributed to him as his miracles.
right.
So this is something very interesting. Now, here we go. He says, when we consider the term evangelical, now, I didn't know this, but when you research the word evangelical, it means marked by militant or crusading zeal. Now, we remember the Crusades, right?
Oh, yeah.
Go back to the Crusades. We see putting all this together. The Crusade, marked by militant or crusading zeal. This is why we're saying that, all of this, family, when understood as the ancestors putting this together, laying this out, and all this being followed, to fulfill, you understand, this whole, idea of this flaw have to be eradicated. So the sacrifice that we had to go through to correct the flaw, we can begin to see, what we call a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'll connect that up with, when I finish this, I'll connect that up with a question that I want to ask the family as it relates to a time cycle being verified that we're at the end time, right at the end.
It's clear to
continue.
See.
Is there, but before we go any further, since we stop in here, is there any questions or any points of reference here you want to point out? Anybody? Okay, well, we'll proceed on. Militant, meaning engage in warfare conflict. That's what marked by militant or crusading zeal, and militant is engaged by warfare conflict. Here, we look at the word crusade. And it's noun 1577 when it was coined. Now, it reads, number one, any of the military expedition undertaken by Christian powers in the 11th through the 13th centuries to win the Holy Land from Muslims. Two, a remedial enterprise undertaken with zeal and enthusiasm. Remedial, adjective 1651, intended as a remedy. Two, concerned with the correction of their faulty study habits and the raising of a pupil's general competence.
This is
enterprise.
This is so profound.
A project or undertaking that is especially difficult, complicated, or risky. Readiness to engage in daring action initiative. Now, anytime you say this is when we understand this is, see, it wasn't just risky for, those that was, the average man in terms of them being, risking their lives, But again, it was risky for us to what? Go through this, you understand, believing in what had been taught to us that was going to change something. Do you know the risk of that? You find a custom of a people who has been given a time cycle to manifest something in the world that you have to go through in order to correct the flaw, but you not understanding that in your fall, in your devolution, in your descent, you believe in something on perfect faith of the Christian church.
Right.
And we risked our lives. We did all this, went to the army and all these things to defend the social structure of the world. This is what we did. Trying to give us a broader perspective of what actually has occurred since our plunge into this physical realm. Continuing on, coming to the close of it. Now, we're going to go to one of the major references that we touched on yesterday to try to synchronize this here. Synchronize this. We're going to Hebrews, the 8th chapter, verse 5. I want to go back to our title, the biblical impact on the traditional template or pattern opposes the eternal pattern, the eternal template, the eternal way of thinking, as opposed to the traditional way. As Yeshua said, ye by your traditions has made truth null and void with our valueless, worthless, offering and gift that we were what? Traditionally doing. Continuing on. We're reading verse 5.
This is amazing.
Who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things, as Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle. For see, said he, that thou make all things according to the pattern
showed to thee in
the mount. Now listen, this is the pattern revealed to Moses that was never clearly understood.
That's correct.
When it came to the old covenant being an allegory, a symbol that would have to be transcended.
That's correct.
This was to give us the power of the unity of consciousness as one with all things in heaven and earth, overcoming dualism.
That's correct.
For the law having a shadow of good things to come, we're reading now Hebrews 10, 1 through 10. For the law having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of things, can never, with those sacrifices that was valueless, worthless, and useless, which they offered year by year, continually make the comers thereunto perfect. It couldn't make you perfect.
No.
Couldn't make you whole. Couldn't make you a people. For then would they not have ceased to be offered, because that the worshipers, once purged, should have no more conscience of sin. But in those sacrifices, there is a remembrance again made of sin every year. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sin. Wherefore, when he cometh into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering thou wouldest not, but a body hast thou prepared me.
Wow.
In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, thou had no pleasure. Then said I, lo, I come in the volume of the book. It is written of me and in me to do thy will, O God. Above, when he said, sacrifice and offering and burnt offering and offering for sin, thou wouldest not, neither has pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. Wait a minute now. Wait a minute. We couldn't have read that. We couldn't have read that.
It's clear, Nasik.
and understood. And it said, let me read that again. Above, when he said, sacrifice and offering and burnt offering and offering for sin, thou wouldest not, neither has his pleasure therein, which are offered by the law. Well, why are we doing it then?
That make no sense.
Ye by your traditions in the false simile my matrix, you must make these offerings, because this is the way you would, maintain a relationship with the hierarchical authority within the simulated reality, because that becomes the God.
Right. Nasik, all the
Go
way,
ahead.
all the way up to to the low frequency field of dominance,
Right.
which arranges weaker frequencies in a hierarchical, vertically integrated fashion. That's
Yeah,
that's the God that you're worshiping.
that's the God.
you're trying to please.
Right. Then said, lo, I come to do thy will, O God. He has taken away the first, that he may establish the second, by which we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. So we got a little bit more and explanations here, and we want to stop at this point and ask the question again. Is there any questions or any comments or things beginning to become a little bit more clear?
I'm going to pause it, Nasik. Okay.
As we prepare to close out the latter part of the revelation, it brings to mind a reference that was shared with us by Eitai, Ecclesiastes 8, 5, and 6. Now, let's put that in perspective with what we just got through going through of Hebrews 10, 1 through 10, in terms of the sacrifices and offering that was not of any value. And that these sacrifices, this allegorical language not being understood, a question arose. And the question was on this wise. Have you ever considered why suffering, pain, and destruction
There you go.
have remained as consistent in their occurrences? Perfect question.
Perfect.
Now, when you put that in context with what we just read, Hebrews, and what we just talked about, it makes sense now why your pain and suffering has been what? Have remained so consistent.
Yeah.
Now let's kind of magnify it. Whosoever keepeth the commandments shall feel no evil thing. And a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. Now, he says, whosoever keepeth the commandment. Well, let's not think of the commandments in terms of don't do this or don't do this or don't do it. let's think of the commandment being a holistic idea of being unified with all, you understand, wholeness and unity and oneness of life itself, the energy in life itself. Let's think of that commandment, okay?
Love
Because
thyself.
of that commandment, then we would think in terms of something else, you know, thou shalt not do this and thou shalt not do this and that and that. But let's put it in perspective. Whosoever keepeth the commandments shall feel no evil thing. And a wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment. Because to every purpose now, / intention, for every intention, there is a time and judgment. So whatever you intend to do, whatever your purpose to do, whenever you do it, you expect that which you do in due time to produce a result. It says, therefore the misery of man is great upon him. Well, why is the misery of man, upon the man's heart, that become wise, in understanding time and judgment? But now let's look at that again. Let's read it again. Whosoever keepeth the commandments shall feel no evil thing. Now, if you maintain unity and harmony and oneness with
That's right.
the energy of life, no evil thing is to occur.
That's right.
Then it says, a wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. Well, time and judgment is based upon the thing that you intend to do or the thing that you purposely do. It's going to have a time and it's going to have a response, so to speak.
That's cool.
So he goes on to say, because to every purpose or every intention, whatever you do, there is a time and a judgment or a response. Therefore, whatever you do that is not in harmony with the whole unity and oneness, you can rest of a surety there's a purpose and an intention that is not in harmony with that. That's just a matter of time that there's going to be a what? A result or a response. And if it ain't in harmony, it's going to cause misery. It's going to cause what? Great pain, destruction and even death. Continuing on. Herein the scribe reminds us that for every purpose / intention, there's a time and a judgment. Or for every purpose intention, there's a time and a corresponding response. So whatever your intentions are, whatever you intend and whatever you carry out and do, there has to be a corresponding response to that. Meaning simply that the response / that the response, constitute the reply, which is in agreement with the purpose or intent. In other words, your response has to constitute the reply of what you had intent to do and what your purpose to do. And when you did it, there had to be a reply, cause and effect. So your reply has to be what? Relative to the intent or the purpose. So now, when we understand this, we begin to understand that ain't nobody causing anything to happen to you but yourself.
That's correct.
Whatever you intend to do and your purpose in doing it is going to what? Have a corresponding response. Remember that. That's why it's so important for us to understand the keeping of the commandment is to keep it in harmony with the unity of thought that's in harmony with the pattern of what? Immortality, the pattern of the eternal.
That's right.
That's the pattern that we got to keep in harmony with.
That's right.
Any other pattern of thought or doing going to produce a judgment, or a corresponding response that's going to be misery that we cannot afford to pay or do not want to pay. We are compelled at this point in history to pursue the purpose to a fundamental question. Whose mind is in agreement with such an objective and why? Now, well, of course, our religious beliefs have us to look outside,
right,
right, but whose mind? It's the mind of the simulated reality that you acquired in what we call the compulsory education and the religious practices that you are the culture traits of Christianity.
That's correct.
Remember what he said, the Pope said, and go back to the definition again, because I want this to be clear. He makes the statement, he says, culture, the development of the mind by educational training. That's what culture is.
Yes.
It develops or it expands a mindset. And this mindset is in opposition to the divinity and oneness and wholeness and singularity of life. The mind is in opposition to that. It is not, you understand, that realm of consciousness that puts you in harmony with the organic. It's just the opposite. So, he says, we compel at this point in history to pursue the purpose of a fundamental question. Whose mind is in agreement with such an objective and why? If relative laws govern and the response are in agreement, then someone is purposely destroying your life support system. But the someone is you.
That's right.
Someone is us. We are destroying our life support system. But we keep looking at that vertical, integrated, hierarchical concept as is being external. God in heaven, right, and you on earth. And since God is in heaven and you're on earth, and you violating the commandments of the divinity and unity and wholeness, then the devil has slipped in, and now you serving the interests of the devil, and as you serve the interests of the devil, you become cursed. But the devil, if there is a devil, it's got to be you and I.
That's correct.
And if you're going to be a God, it's got to be you and I.
That's right.
Quote, scriptural reference, Psalms 105, 7 and 8. He is the Lord, our God. His judgments are in all the earth. He has remembered his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations. Psalms 105, 7 and 8. Quote, the responses that I'm referring to are these judgments that are in all the earth. It is for that reason that your pain and suffering have been as consistent as the mind with which they are in agreement. Now let's go back to something. This concept of earth. We not to look at the earth as being something physical.
Correct.
But we not to look at the earth as being an energetic, correct, element of the oneness of all life in creation.
That's correct.
Continuing on. By way of deception, believing something different other than the organic nature, the organic divinity, made your mind your own destruction. By way of deception, you have made your own mind. Now he brings it home, through deception, through applying the allegorical as a historical. You have actually taken on the mind that the allegorical is the historical, and that is the truth, and I must apply that, and applying that way of thinking, that consciousness, that mind has become what? your own destruction.
That's correct.
Your own destruction. Both internal and external, your purpose slash intention. The power of dualism, when not understood, tends to cause one to always blame someone else other than themselves. Therefore, when you understand the power of dualistic language, it is responsible for creating the response that constitutes the corresponding reply, which is in agreement with the purpose intention. Afterwards, each individual turns to themselves and then declare the power of Satan, the devil, without ever understanding it is their dualistic conceptions and perception
Absolutely.
that is the cause. So we'll cause this portion, to be brought to an end, and would like to open the floor for any questions or comments. Holdings family.